Shukla, CEO and Chairman of Automation Anywhere. Automation Anywhere is a software company. We help customers create AI agents and automation on our platform. We have over 5,000 customers in 90 countries. Some of the largest companies on the planet to many mid-sized customers use us. We have 300 million AI agents running on our platform, and this has been doubling at a rapid pace. So at one point, you are looking at 1 billion AI agents on our platform. Anybody thinks that future is yet to come, it is here and it is accelerating fast. But what we are about is trying to reimagine how work happens. How much of work can happen autonomously so that we can focus on work that matters most? How much work AI can assist you so that you can be more creative? And what part of work really needs to be manual in year 2025?
We're really, really thrilled. Maybe just by way of introduction, Mihir, can you talk for a second about I know you're undertaking a pretty broad transformation effort at Automation Anywhere. Tell us, what are the kind of key elements of your vision that you are seeking as you're pushing forward into this transformation?
So we have the vision with AI, it is possible to run a large part of enterprises in an autonomous way. And so the question is, what percentage of your enterprise will run autonomously? What percentage will run assisted by AI? And what percentage will be manual? And we've given ourselves a license to rethink what that looks like. So we are doing this for 5,000 plus of our customers and ourselves to reimagine how work could happen very differently. It turns out in places like customer service, you could have 40% of customer ticket handled autonomously, no human in the loop, within a matter of seconds. In places like tax and certain finance operation, over 90% can be autonomous. So it varies by functions.
Yeah, I think I saw the CEO of Goldman say something like 95% of a prospectus can be written with AI, right?
That's correct.
I have so many questions. Jeremy, where do you want to start?
To me, Mihir, I know we talked about this as well earlier. Start with your organization itself, because it's one thing to go tell other people to do something. It's another thing to say, here's what we've done. Yeah. Can you talk about the organization itself? Because I would say you are a leading indicator of what's possible for others. How did you start by assessing your own organization? Where were some of the early areas of focus, early wins that led you to believe there's actually something here for our customers as well?
Happy to. So we try to reimagine work across every single aspect of our work. So let's take an example of our customer service. We provide enterprise software to some of the largest and mid-sized companies on the planet. And so when we deployed our software on customer service, we found out that 40% of customer requests didn't need a human in the loop. There are certain kinds of workload where, let's say, if you're trying to figure out what is the status of my ticket, you don't always want to talk to somebody if you can get a status right away. So about 40% of tickets could be completely handled. And it lifts the level of quality of service we could provide, because now people could focus a lot more on the other tickets that needed more time. Take example of tax operations. Tax operation from the highest level is applying set of rules to a set of numbers. There is always an aspect of strategic tax view that you can apply, but that's about 10%. The 90% could be fully automated.
So when you use those two examples, customer service and tax, for example, when I'm thinking in terms of principles others can leverage, and I don't think it's necessarily look at your customer service, look at your tax, right? It's more, what were the principles that led you to those areas? Were you thinking, where is our operation heavily rule-based, for example? I'm making this up, right? Just based on what I'm listening to you. But what were the selection criteria that led you to customer service or tax for your own business first?
So I think the way to think is that there are two different criteria we applied. Of course, the rule-based is very easy to automate. Even though rules like tax rules can be 185,000 pages long, with the power of LLMs, now it is possible to understand all of those rules and apply it to a set of numbers. But the other way to think is that where there are a large number of knowledge workers, and wherever there are large number of knowledge workers, what we have done in our industrial way of scaling is we have defined standard operating procedures so that we can produce consistent quality. That means like let's say we have 500 customer service agents. We have a way to operate it in a more standard way, which means there is a significant room for automations there. So if you take a look at our customers, let's say if you are a healthcare customer, claims management, millions and billions of claims that come in their way could be significantly automated. If you are a bank, mortgage applications, KYC can be significantly automated. A huge part of procurement processes, significant part of HR operations.
Maybe I can ask you on the social engineering side of things. I think a lot of CEOs and boards and senior members are sitting and having obviously these conversations. And then you go down to, let's say, your finance team and you're saying, I've heard that 90% of your operation can be automated with Gen AI. Yeah. And then your CFO might say, yeah, but like ours is very complicated. And like it seems to me that increasingly the technology is increasingly there and available. Yeah. And what seems to be kind of lacking is the social engineering tools or the processes to kind of help us adapt organizations that was designed for the time of internet to now time of AI. How do you think about that?
I think first, it makes to talk about why should we do this. Just because AI is available doesn't mean we have to use it. It's a tool, a technology. So maybe if you start with a why, and if once it becomes clear to you that this needs to be done, then often human beings find a way, right? So there are two reasons. I always start with the why, because what and how people can often figure out if they're clear about the why. I think there are two reasons why we have to use AI. One is that if you take a look at stats, for many, many years, every decade, our productivity was improving. So it used to take 8 people to produce $1 million, then it took 6 people. And then in 2008, it took 5.1% to produce $1 million. Since 2008, that hasn't changed. In 2024-25, it still takes 5.1% to produce $1 million, which means in the last 16 years, we have spent collectively on the planet over $40 trillion on IT spend, and we haven't improved the productivity at all. That's a problem. If you keep doing it, their business will not improve.
Especially with aging workforces, right? Especially with population decline, right? If we aren't finding a way to reduce that number, I mean, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there, but my mind immediately goes to, but quickly it becomes an existential necessity, right?
Exactly. There is a second piece with a 3% declining workforce, right? So for last 2,000 years, the economy has been a twin plane engine. One productivity increase, and other is the more people working in the workforce. On one hand, we haven't improved the productivity as much. On second hand, it's a declining workforce. First time in human history, we are living in a society where you have globally 3% declining workforce. And it's going to remain that way for foreseeable future. So how do you operate an economy? How do you operate in a world there are less people working every year? This is entirely new for everybody. And what happens when we can't figure out? So the fundamentals of this, that we have to double the productivity that we have produced in last many years. Now think about it, the internet, computers, every software ever written. It took so many things, so many innovations, the iPhone, everything combined, produced the productivity where we are. Does anybody have an idea how to double it?
Wait, but you said it hasn't changed since 2008, which if my memory serves, I was in business school at that time and I didn't have an iPhone.
Yeah.
Which is to say the introduction of the iPhone and social media and all of, call it Web 2, this is the question to you. It did not move the productivity needle. Is that correct?
it did not move the productivity needle. For businesses, we might have our personal life got better, but in businesses, it still takes 5.1% to produce $1 million. That hasn't changed. Yeah.
That's a staggering realization, actually.
Right.
Because I would say there's this kind of, I get choked up when I think about it. There's this kind of almost delusion of productivity, right? The fact that we've got our iPhone, we're going to bed with these devices by our beds. We wake up, we look at them first thing in the morning. I'm sure the implicit rationale, even though none of us would say it this way, is we're being far more productive. We're producing far more value. But what you just said, since 2008, the amount of kind of dollars per capita productivity have not improved despite all of the advances to our quote unquote productivity suite. Is that right?
That's correct. And it is because the software that we use is by the time you implement some of the enterprise software, it takes few years to implement them fully, and the world has changed. So by the time you start using it, all the benefits that you had thought would come, you don't realize all of them. And then very soon, world changes even more. And now you're behind in how your software is configured versus how world is configured.
You know what I think of? And I mean, there's kind of a direct impact and there's also, it's analogous, but a lot of the research, if you look at, what Cal Newport, for example, great researcher, wrote a book about slow productivity. But one of the things that he highlights is the cost of distractions. Yeah. And for every, ping or notification, we lose something like 15 minutes of focus, right? For every time your phone vibrates, and say I'm right. Last night I was, up late writing a blog post because I was distracted during the day. I wasn't able to do it. Basically, for every, ping that comes in while I'm doing that focused work, I lose 15 minutes of productivity. And certainly there's kind of a direct implication there to productivity. But I also wonder, to your point about organizational renewal and integrations, if you could think about kind of software updates as effectively distractions or effectively notifications to the organization. And every time the organization has to update or adopt a new technology, it's the effective productivity impact of a distraction on an individual worker. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think we still work in a World War II task-oriented era, and we think replying email or replying messages is work. We are studying how work gets done, and it takes 32 emails, 82 messages, 6 meetings, and 3 beers later, you cannot get your work done. We are the weavers of our generation because each of those is a thread in how we are weaving work, right? And now when you sit in front of an AI system and if you get your prompt right, you get the whole cloth out, right? Instead of a step by step. So if that analogy makes sense, you are looking at a very different way work gets done. Look, where I was going with though is just to finish the thought on why is if we fail to solve these problems that we talked about declining population and lack of productivity, what happens is there is less to go around. And when there is less to go around, the society cannot support its infrastructure. It cannot support bridges, cannot support healthcare, cannot support social security. The democracy is weakened. There are more riots on the street. There are more wars on the planet. Does all of this sound familiar? There is more at stake here than just use AI. Look, this is a technology. If there was a new energy source or a new metal or something new that would help solve the problem of this, we should use it. It's about solving a problem. I think AI is coming at an opportune moment to solve a larger societal challenges. It's a tool like we have harnessed horses and winds and nuclear energy. It's power to be harnessed.
But just because you've been through it, I'm kind of keen to try to kind of like unpack a little bit more the practicality of it. Because I obviously it makes a lot of sense kind of starting with the why. And the why can range from everything to like we need to kind of improve our EBIT to, you won't be able to hire more people in your team and you're getting more and more work on your plate to, we need to kind of create productivity for the world because otherwise all these negative consequences have it. Yeah. But still, I find going then into your finance team, there's still kind of like, I think this kind of invisible wall between the technology that is available today
Yeah.
And then even what seemed to be kind of like a real intent for people to do it. Have you found a way of kind of breaking down this invisible wall, maybe in your organization or for some of the customers that you work with?
That's a great question, Henrik, because often the first thing you hear from people is that, no, but my work is very unique or what we do is so special. What we found is that if you get people started in this direction, if you have 10 people in a group, you will find that 2 people will always looking for a different, better way to work. In general, that has been true across customers, and they will get you started by doing something.
Did you say 2 out of 10? Is that the ratio? 2 out of every 10 people?
2 out of 10 people, could be 3 out of 10. And then the other 4 or 5 people will see the possibility, then they get excited about it. They won't be the first one to start, but they see it and now they can imagine the possibility having seen it. And then it catches like a wildfire. You'll always have 1 or 2 people in the room who only use your smartphone because the old phones are not available. So there are always people who will resist change. But in general, you could get 80-85% of the organization moving if you get them started. I think the key is to, instead of change happening to them, the key is the teams leading the change. That's the key to bringing change.
Yeah, that's actually dovetails perfectly with where I was curious to go, which is, what are the organizational structural implications? What do businesses need to do to reorganize? And you kind of hinted at it, that teams may need to lead the change, but what does that look like practically?
Yeah. So the way many of our customers do is they start by challenging the team and say, look, I want 10% of work be fully autonomous in a department, or 20% fully autonomous. And they often people start with some funding available, because otherwise you get stuck in funding and you stop seeing the larger possibility. And as I said, there will always be team members who are excited about new ways of working. Once you get to a certain outcome in 6 months or a year, then the CFO goes back to the team and say, look, since you got to the 20% autonomous, can I get 10% return back in my financial? And you get to keep the 10%, but I need 10% on my EBITDA. And then 10% is reinvested back in the business. Slowly you begin to negotiate with teams. Once they have seen the possibility, they would resist less. Sometimes when you start with it, you could face a resistance because it's looked like a way to cut people, or so better to engage people on art of the possible before you begin to restructure teams and the possibilities ahead.
So what I'm hearing you say is there needs to be an ambitious goal, something like 10% autonomous, in any given function. Then you've got to provide some funding, I suppose, for exploration, for training, for experimentation, et cetera. And then there's, an outcome that then becomes a negotiation with the CFO. Is it sufficient for a typical team to have the goal and have the funding? Are they off to the races, or do you find, and maybe this is a loaded question, I find that giving folks permission is one thing, equipping them and enabling them with not only psychological safety, but also actual pragmatic skills. If you told me, Jeremy, go make a song, other than with AI, which now I can, the problem is I don't know any instruments. Yeah. So you can say, hey, I'm going to give you $10 million. Unless I invest in my ability to do that, yeah. You can give me a year, I'm not coming back with a song, right? So how do you think about other elements besides, call it a goal, funding, or is your observation, Ben, that that's sufficient to tip the people, as you said, the 2 out of 10 who are eager to make a change? Is that enough for them?
I think you pointed out a key element, which is to train them on some of the tools and capabilities on what is possible. So at Automation Anywhere, we have trained over 1 million people on how to use these capabilities all over the world in about 90 countries. And just of 1 week, there is a basic training available for 1 week. And that 1 week training opens up your eyes to what is possible. Human beings are amazing. They're amazing everywhere. Once you show them that, your wheels start churning, and everybody comes up with ways to do things in their respective teams and departments.
Mm.
We have today 300 million processes running on our platform. Can you imagine? This is all innovative thinking by our customers and partners, right? Who knew 300 million things could be automated? People are very resourceful. To your point, Jeremy, once you train them and give them some funding and tell them why this is so important.
How much do you think if productivity hasn't changed since 2008? What's your kind of like gut feel on how long it'll take AI to kind of make a dent into that stat and how impactful it'll be?
So I think, as I said, today it takes 5.1% to produce $1 million. In another 10 years, you could get to 3, which is where we should be in a normal course of action. I think our current state is stagnated. But if we continue, last 70 years of our journey towards getting work done better, that's what you're looking at. Does the technology have the capability? Absolutely. Change is hard for people, so we'll have to rally around us, reorganize ourselves around it, and, use these amazing capabilities to get there.
Well, it sounds like you've been studying, as you said earlier, I was just looking back through my notes. You said, we've been studying how work is done.
Yeah.
And you kind of characterized it a second ago. I'd love for you to tell us first, what have you found as you studied how work is done? And then second, how are you rethinking how work should be done?
Yeah. So we observed that a couple of points. One is that when we think of these enterprise applications, whether it is your ERP applications or CRM applications or HR applications or many others, we found that a user primarily spends 15% of their time in that application. And they use about 8 to 18 different applications to get work done. So the nature of work is very different than what we might believe. So you are spending far more time outside of your core application, across application to kind of go from Outlook to Excel to ERP to something else, to orchestrate a work. That's the nature of the work that has become. And as a result, it takes a lot longer to get work done. The second piece I mentioned is that we are kind of weaving the work. We confuse work with the task. This is the since World War II mindset, task is a work. So sending an email and sending messages, going to meetings. But one of the things that we did this experiment with people and say, what if instead of doing all of this, you have to finish this work and produce end outcome in 3 steps? And when people were faced with it, eventually they figured out how to not do all of those things and find a way to get it done in 3 steps, right? Take a shortcut. You don't have to send 32 emails to get to the outcomes always. Sometimes there is a place for it. So we confuse task with the work, right? And the reason why this is very important is when AI will get to it in 1 step and couple of prompt changes and you get the outcome, we better begin to think about it differently. The way of thinking about our work has to fundamentally change. I was just going to mention that I saw this happening in few workplaces, including ours, where people who got better at prompt engineering with AI system begin to ask a different question in the meeting because they begin to expect the same out of human being and say, I'm not asking you, did you send the email? Because that's not what I ask an AI system. I'm not asking a task. I'm saying, when can I get this outcome that I get, right? Can I get that? Can I get that?
Actually, very interesting on that point. I'm increasingly, in a quite a crazy way, looking at the organizations I'm involved in the same way, where everything is an input and output. Everything is a prompt and a response. And the prompt might be to a human, or it might be to an AI. It doesn't really matter. But if you start to actually look at your organization structure as just API calls, it kind of actually changed a little bit how you think about it. I did have another question, though. One is, you through the organization are such a good student of how do you take repetitive kind of workflows and then basically replace it with a bot. When you personally are looking at your own work, I imagine that in spite of the processes you have there, you started to do that. Could you mention a few examples of how you kind of looked at your own personal repetitive workflows, and then where do you use Gen AI to reduce that workload?
It has been eye-opening, Henrik, on that question. So take an example. My team has made a specific LLM for the CEO and for all the interactions I have and all the people I meet. And so when I typically go to an event, a large CEO event, my meetings and interactions would generate work for my team that would keep them busy for the next 10 days at least. Now they feed all of that. And before I get home, all of this is ready for the next step. And it is driving me harder. I used to...
What is that? Is that, for example, like following up on a potential client, coming back on some different materials that you promised somebody? Is that the kind
That's
of...
right. Yeah. Let's say I've spoken to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I'd give my team a brief of, how this company wants to transform being an autonomous enterprise. Our system will automatically generate a proposal based on their last public statement, everything available, the way their teams are organized, where the spends are, and what it could be. And, all of that is auto-generated. Of course, there's some refinement that a human being can add to, but it's ready to go.
And how do you think about, one of the things we talked about in another episode was that it's kind of a new skill for some people to go from the idea of being a task-oriented human to be more kind of somebody who productizes the solutions into a bot flow. And so that's what a product developer traditionally did. Now humans have to do that task. Yeah. Do you have any kind of tricks on how to start to make that mind change so that you yourself maybe go, hey, I'm about to do these tasks over and over again. Can we please make an LM for that?
I think that there is not an easy switch, but that happens over time. So I mentioned this task. Let's take this example of task of after I met a CEO of a Fortune 500, somebody was doing series of tasks and it took 10 days. Now that all of it is available within first hour, it accelerated at an exponential pace, the level of interactions and follow-ups and conversations. The nature of work fundamentally changed. I don't think even I was ready for it, where after I met 10 CEOs, the next day I'm ready to have a detailed conversation with 10 CEOs. That's completely new, but it is exciting. That was the end result of it. Why should I wait for 10 days? So I don't think I'm fully adjusted to that, but I am learning to, right? That's just it's a new pace. Everything has a new pace to how fast you move.
Well, the industrial, I think part of the whole industrial complex and task orientation, and the reason that we lob an email back is because now we have plausibility to not do anything until we hear back from the person, right?
Yeah.
And I've noticed that, stuff that I used to work with people on, now I work with AI on. And the challenge is I don't get a break because it just gets back immediately. I mean, like a silly example is I was taking a class, like pre-custom GPTs. I was taking a class on how to build a bot.
Yeah.
And I used to think, I post a question to the class Discord and then the TA answers within 12 hours. So I post a question and I go to bed and I wake up, see if they got back to me. And if not, like, I can't keep going on my bot. Right. And the TA kept saying, have you asked ChatGPT? Have you asked ChatGPT? And I thought, dude, I paid thousands of dollars. Answer my question. I realized the TA is actually teaching me the meta skill of you don't have to wait for me to respond. And when I realized that, that's when I started pulling all-nighters because ChatGPT is a TA that responds instantaneously.
Right.
And all of a sudden I realized, you know what? And here's the point that I was making. I actually enjoyed, quote unquote, needing to wait for another human because it gave me an excuse to stop working. And with AI, weirdly, we don't have that excuse of, I need to wait on this other human anymore.
So fascinating, because I mean, that's the point you just made that we're now totally excited about. But I mean, I have the same thing. I have a coach, and he's introducing all these like mental frameworks of kind of how I act and stuff like that. And now he has an agent that every Monday will ask me basically, have you worked on the stuff that we talked about in the last section? And then I will reply, and often like thoughtful and a little bit emotional, like, I had this conversation the other day that was difficult. And within like 8 seconds, there'll be like, there's a very detailed kind of like reply and another question. And sometimes you're like, I'm too emotionally trained on the email I sent you like a minute ago to kind of go into that. And so to your point, it is fascinating, all these things that we now have to learn how to tackle. For example, like I'm sure like talking to a Fortune 500 CEO is like emotionally draining because you have to be completely on your game. And when suddenly like the next day, your calendar is booked with 6 of them, then you have to figure out how to tackle that.
That's right. But I think if you play out the future of this, if this keeps working out and we figure out how to do this, it will take few years. But you are looking at 4.5 day work week, right? Because you are able to do so much more. And maybe you just need a little more time thinking about how to do this right versus just being too busy doing your task. That's a good thing. Not that it will happen immediately because everything has to adjust to the new dynamics. But we have seen this happen before, right? When the automation came in the manufacturing and assembly line, we went from 6 days to 5-day work week. Most of us can't imagine going back to 6 days. I think this is the automation and the knowledge worker economy. And so you could imagine, at least in that part of the life, you don't have to work as hard as we do in a task-oriented world.
What are some of the areas that you've either seen or just that you've pondered about that you hope will not be automated or that you think can't be automated?
There are so many areas. So take an example in a customer service. Let's say you provide an emergency travel insurance. I'm picking an example that most of us can relate to. And in emergency travel insurance, there are 2 types of reasons why you're calling. One is you are in trouble, in which case you want to talk to a human being. Absolutely, right? I'm calling it because it's an emergency. I need to find a way. Or you are calling the status to know your claim or something else. AI agents can do that. Right? They can tell you where everything is. So for every type of a workload, think about this workload is for an AI agent and this workload is for a human being. And now when you think like that, almost across every aspect of work that could change. Take an example of HR operations. HR operations, so much of from payrolls to 401k, so much of it could be automated. We now have assisted career development plans for every single employee that are using AI, we can generate it. But then you want a manager to have a conversation. That's different. Now you have an entire plan made, but to have a human conversation on how to develop people's career, that's a human conversation. In finance, I mentioned that in certain areas, about 90% automation is possible. This example that first time when I saw this of tax operation being automated, I'll use this example to make a point. The tax laws change about 43,000 times a year. And I always wondered, how do people do this? Volumes and volumes of tax laws. And we started automating this about 1.5 years ago for one of our large customers. And in 2 weeks, we found that there were $100 million worth of errors. That our autonomous platform figured out that if the tax was calculated correctly, you would save 100 million. Since then, we have done this for hundreds of customers, and it has been true in every case that there is a large amount of error in how businesses calculate tax. This was never a human job. It's not a human job to follow a 183,000-page tax laws that changes 43 times a year. We did the best we could, but so when you automate 90% of that work, the strategic value of finance is far more for me as a CEO to my business than calculating taxes. In my business, I can tell you, and for many of our customers, if person is not calculating taxes and he's sitting on a table and thinking about how strategically finance is a tool and what you could do with it, he's a far better partner to me, that person, he or she.
I think that's a good point. I have a last question for you. I saw a clip on YouTube of you talking, I think in Davos, about the consequences of AI and sometimes the kind of like the consequences that we're not aware of. And you kind of like began to talk a little bit about how when we invented social media, we obviously didn't know kind of what would happen with it. Could you talk a little bit on that? Because I think it's an important conversation, obviously, for somebody who sells AI systems. It's a conversation that we often don't have because many of us are kind of like excited about the technology, and we tend to talk about the excited part, not as much some of the things. What are some of the consequences that we should be aware of that we might not be?
I think few of them, but one that you're referring to is the example. What we learned from social media is that who would have thought a like button would change how social groups are organized, and it could pose a risk to the elections and democracies. And but now we know. Now we know that these tools can scale to do good as much as it could be misused by a rogue agent. So now that we understand it, we can't take it for granted the second time. So all of this tools and systems needs to be governed. They have to be used in a responsible way. It is possible to use these capabilities to remove bias in how we operate, but it could also be used to scale the existing biases. So like any tool, it is up to you how you use it, right? So I think we are better off having learned from power of social media and how that scaled to better leverage these technologies. I think one more thing we have to be aware of is we have to take everybody with us. These are big changes, and changes are hard for people. And how do we take different parts of the society with us in this journey? I mentioned that there's 3%, Jeremy, you also highlighted 3% decline in workforce. And we are going to need 11 million people on AI skills. It's not like there are 11 million people sitting on some island that we don't know about, right? I mean, these are the same people we know about. So the best thing to do is to reskill everybody, and, where are the people going to come from, right? So these are all the people we have on the planet. So reskilling is an important initiative, and taking everybody with us in this journey.
Mihir, you're referring to upskilling. I know that's somewhat of a passion of yours. We could probably dedicate an entire episode to that, but could you just speak briefly about the kind of social impact initiatives and what you've been doing with upskilling there?
Yeah. We believe this technology should make our lives better. It should make societies better. Technologies are the sources that you harness to make world a better place. So we took these technologies to various parts of the world. In Africa, we trained 700 women. In parts of the Mississippi Delta in United States, where there is extreme poverty, we took these technologies there, and in India and Nepal and various parts of the world. And what we learned was it was amazing to see, because these people didn't have to unlearn anything. And these technologies that operate on a human language is a more natural way for everybody to work. And so we were able to take a person in Mississippi who was flipping burgers for $15 an hour or less to a $120,000 job in 3 months. And what it told us is that talent is evenly distributed, opportunity is not. This person in Mississippi was flipping burger was capable of doing many things that you would expect from somebody in Silicon Valley, but they just didn't get exposed to it. So this is an opportunity for us. And since then, we have seen this play out again and again in all parts of the world, because people are amazing everywhere. Out of 700 women who got educated in first 2 months, 450 got a job in AI.
One thing I would love for our audience to be able to do is there a pathway for recommending if you know of a community in need of upskilling and they want to connect to your initiative? Is there an easy way to do that?
So on our automationanywhere.com, you can go to our section about Automation Anywhere University, where we have made all the education free on AI. And within a week, you can get a basic education on AI. The advanced course is a couple of weeks. What we learned is that you don't need 2 or 4 year degree to get to this point. Within 3 months, you know enough about how to leverage what you know and how to apply AI to it. And that job could often pay you 120,000 or more for whatever that you're doing, whether you're in HR or finance or operations or doing it with AI will pay you far more.
Incredible.
And as I said, it's not even hard. Now the technologies have made it, they're more human friendly. It is easy to learn.
Mihir, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. What an amazing conversation.
It's such an interesting, it also must be such a fascinating world to just sit in the center of all this bot creation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think we could have part 2 and part 3 and part 4 with Mihir for sure. I think I have a prediction. It'd be fun to do at some point. We don't have to do it today just because I don't want to put you on the spot. It'd be fun for us to predict what resonated with the other person at some point. And okay, so I'll go first. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm going to go first.
You know that I always do it. I just wait until you say something smart and then I slightly reframe it and say the same thing back.
Henrik Werdelin, I know what resonated with you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Hang on. I'm scrolling through my notes here.
Okay.
What resonated with you is talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not.
Boo.
Tell me.
That was one.
Okay. So if you're listening at home, put 1 on the chalkboard for Jeremy. Henrik, what resonated with me? I'd rate, it's a little bit unfair because we're biased to say yes, right? Like to say no is like, is there any part that particularly didn't resonate with you? You have to be a jerk to say no.
I'm pretty sure that you had noted down the stat that basically productivity didn't change since 2008.
Oh, dude. I'm eating, that's like catnip. Are you kidding me? The fact, 2008 of all years, okay? That's nuts because that's the year the iPhone was introduced.
I know.
And the fact that productivity hasn't changed since the introduction of what is probably the singular, visualization of human productivity and the knowledge, in the Web 2.0 economy, that blew my mind. I think there's actually pieces of brain on the bookshelf behind me. I was shocked. So you're right. 1-to-1. It's 1-to-1.
Okay.
I don't have any other predictions for you. I got to say this one thing because it's fresh and I'm looking at it right now. When Mihir was mentioning the whole tax errors that, in 2 weeks, they found $100 million in errors. And he said this phrase, he said, a human simply cannot keep up. And that, I don't know if you remember, but it reminded me of our conversation with Anvisha Pai, the founder of Dover. And the big opportunity there, you remember what it was?
No.
It was the job that they couldn't hire fast enough for. It was the thing that they couldn't keep up with, right? Bucketizing the email responses from prospective kind of roles for new positions. And it just made me it put a new frame on perhaps where to look for opportunity. What's the inhumane job?
Yeah.
What is the thing that literally is impossible for a human to do? And I think what Mihir said was there are 43,000 changes to the tax law every year. We've never expected a human to be able to do that. That should be in this crosshairs of every organization because now you can get AI to do the inhumane thing. I love that as kind of a paradigm for hunting, so to speak, for opportunities.
I like that too. I went, as you know, I always get kind of buckled down and kind of like the very humanistic kind of side of things. And I was kind of like just fascinated by what do you do when suddenly you are not the bottleneck anymore? And I think in part I'm feeling that a little bit with some of my projects because I can now output so fast with Gen AI that it used to be like people were just waiting for me. And so do you then use that to become more productive? Do you use that to take some time of thinking? How do you then start to incorporate that into your workflow that now that you actually don't have 10 to-dos and 1,000 emails to reply, do you then like make thinking time and can you become better at that? And so the whole kind of idea of what happens when you're no longer just running after all the signals that are telling you to come back with something immediately. What happens there to business and to us as individuals? I thought that was just a fascinating thought.
You went existential with it. I went deeply practical because I also resonated with that same idea of I think even in the conversation has resonated, right? We don't have to wait for a human anymore. To me, and I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but this is something I was talking to my dad about. It sounds like a weird thing, but I think you'll grok it immediately. Time means nothing to an AI. And when you realize that, for example, like an hour-long YouTube video, if you ask Gemini, what are the points of this video, it will tell you instantaneously. Whereas if I ask you, you'd say, hang on, let me watch and maybe watch it at 2x, but it still takes you 30 minutes, right? But all of a sudden we have these models where time doesn't really, and Mihir's example was, usually I had a 10-day break between when I got back from an event and when my team was ready. Well, again, if the team has been thoughtful about codifying the workflows and the things that they're doing in those 10 days, the reason that he comes back and he has no break is because, again, it doesn't take an AI to do 10 days worth of work. Now, it may take a human who's experienced with that work 100 days to codify it. I'm not diminishing the rigor required to actually do that. But my point is, I think another perhaps selection criteria, if you will, similar to what's the inhumane thing, is what would you do if time were no limitation? Because the truth is with an AI, time is not a limitation. And if you think about, I was talking with my dad about an issue, and he's basically, I don't want to give away any kind of secrets because he has a very important job, but in his world, he's often given only an hour to do something that could easily take a week to do. And if he had a week to do it, he would do it a lot better. And I go, Dad, in that hour, you can give an AI a week to do something, and it's kind of like a mind-blowing thought to realize, what would you do if you had unlimited time to do something? Like, what would you commission?
So I think that is probably like, I think it used to be when people were asking, what's a good way to think about what to do AI? People would say something like, what would you do if you had 100 MBAs, or what would you do if you have 100 interns? To your point, maybe the two questions that we're kind of like teasing out now is, one is, what would you do if you had unlimited time? And two, what is the thing that you basically would never be able to do no matter how much time you had?
Yeah.
And I think those are kind of like maybe good trigger kind of questions.
That'd be great.
A lot of things you'll like to do.
And I think they seem so, call it hyperbolic, that I think people may be prone to dismiss them. But, for myself, I really want to, sit with them and say, no, really, what would I do if time were no issue? It's actually worth sitting with it. And I think for organizations that are, Mihir talked about, setting ambitious goals, setting budget, for organizations that are really thinking like that, I think they owe it to themselves to just start, fresh sheet of paper, legitimately, if time were not an issue, what would we do? Right. Yeah. And for each organization, given their capabilities and advantages and customers, right, all that, it will be different. But I think that it will probably yield some ahas and epiphanies that right now people don't even realize are possible.
My brain goes the Tourette's way of saying, if I had unlimited time, I would let Jeremy Utley finish his sentences when you get excited about something.
Wait, so that you shorten the time?
Just make it a little bit short.
Wow, dude.
And with that,
okay. Hey, audience, give us your feedback there. But seriously, if you like this episode, if you enjoyed this conversation, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please share with a friend.
Smash that button.
What'd you say?
Smash that button.
Smash that button. Smash that like. And leave us some comments, especially on YouTube. Love that people are now leaving comments on YouTube. That's super cool. Does Spotify have comments? I don't even know.
They do.
Yeah, but I feel like at least I don't get notifications. I've been getting notifications, YouTube comments, and that's super rewarding and fun. So drop us a com. I don't know is that a thing? Drop a com. And we'd love to hear from you. Until next time.
Bye.